February 1st, 1979. Mehrabad Airport, Tehran. The winter sky above the runway is pale and cold, but the air below trembles with heat from hundreds of thousands of bodies pressing against the airport perimeter. Waves of people surge through surrounding streets, filling rooftops, clinging to lampposts, climbing the skeleton frames of unfinished buildings. Tehran has not slept. For hours, the crowds have waited, chanting in unison, "Khomeini, Khomeini, Khomeini." Men with dark beards and wool coats stand shoulder to shoulder beside young students wrapped in scarves against the winter air. Women in black chadors raise their hands in prayer. Children sit on their fathers' shoulders, waving photographs that have been passed from hand to hand across the city. Everywhere the same image. The stern face of a cleric with deep-set eyes and a black turban. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Above the city, an Air France Boeing 747 cuts through the clouds as it descends toward the runway. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere is strangely quiet. Journalists fill the aisles, notebooks open, cameras ready. Many of them have covered revolutions before. Few have seen anything like this. Near the front of the cabin sits the 76-year-old cleric who has become the center of a movement that has already shaken the foundations of Iran. Khomeini does not appear triumphant. He sits calmly wrapped in a dark cloak, hands resting lightly on his knees. His face is expressionless, almost distant. For nearly 15 years he has lived in exile, first in Iraq and then in a small village outside Paris. From there he has watched a monarchy that once seemed unshakable begin to crumble. Now he is returning to claim the future of an entire nation. Outside the aircraft window, Tehran spreads across the plateau beneath the snow-capped Alborz Mountains. The city is tense and electric. Soldiers patrol intersections. Burned-out vehicles remain on street corners from recent clashes. Barricades appear overnight and vanish by morning. The Iranian state still exists on paper, but its authority is dissolving by the hour. Only 2 weeks earlier, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the ruler of Iran, for nearly 4 decades, boarded a plane and left the country. Officially, it was described as a temporary departure. Few believed it. For years, the Shah had presented himself as the architect of a powerful modern nation. His government controlled one of the world's largest oil industries. His military possessed advanced American weapons. Tehran had become a glittering capital of skyscrapers, luxury hotels, and Western influence. But beneath the surface, anger had been building. The Shah's secret police organization, Savak, had built a reputation for surveillance arrests and torture. Political parties were tightly controlled. Religious leaders felt marginalized by the regime's aggressive modernization programs. Economic growth had created wealth, but also inequality. Rural migrants flooded the cities, struggling to find work in neighborhoods that expanded faster than infrastructure. Students protested, clerics preached, workers organized strikes. By 1978, the opposition was no longer fragmented. It was becoming a national uprising. From exile in France, Khomeini had spoken through cassette tapes and written messages that circulated through mosques, universities, and bazaars. His words spread faster than the government could suppress them. Each speech sharpened the message. The Shah must go. Islamic government must replace the monarchy. As protests grew larger, the regime responded with force. Demonstrations turned into funerals. Funerals turned into larger demonstrations. The cycle repeated again and again. By the autumn of 1978, strikes had paralyzed key sectors of the Iranian economy, including the oil industry that funded the state itself. Government ministries struggled to function. Military commanders watched the streets carefully, unsure how far they were willing to go to defend a collapsing order. In January 1979, the Shah made the decision that would change everything. He left Iran. When his plane lifted off from Tehran airport, many of his supporters believed he would soon return. But the revolution had already crossed a point of no return. Inside the descending Air France aircraft, a reporter leans forward toward Khomeini and asks a question that has echoed across international news broadcasts for days. "What do you feel about returning to Iran?" Khomeini pauses. Then he answers with a single word: "Nothing." For the journalist, the answer feels unsettling. A man about to step into one of the most dramatic political transformations of the 20th century shows no visible emotion. But for millions waiting below, emotion is everywhere. As the aircraft touches down on the runway at Mehrabad Airport, a roar erupts across the city. Crowds break through security lines. Cars jam every road leading toward the airport. Revolutionary volunteers attempt to maintain order as people surge forward to catch a glimpse of the cleric whose speeches have helped ignite a revolution. Khomeini steps onto Iranian soil for the first time since 1964. The moment is electric. Yet no one fully understands what will come next. The monarchy that ruled Iran for 2,500 years is collapsing. The political factions that helped bring it down are already maneuvering for power. And the Islamic Republic that will soon emerge has not yet taken shape. To understand how this moment became possible, you must step backward through the years that slowly pushed Iran toward revolution, long before the crowds filled the streets of Tehran, long before the Shah fled the country, and long before Ayatollah Khomeini's voice began echoing through cassette tapes across the nation. The roots of the revolution stretch deep into Iran's struggle between monarchy, modernity, religion, and foreign influence. A struggle that began decades earlier, and one that would reshape the Middle East forever. Continue, do not use. Continue, do not use. Previous section text. Right arrow continues seamlessly from where this left off. Section 2, the throne built on oil and power. August 19th, 1953. Tehran, Iran. The streets around Baharistan Square are filled with chaos. Crowds push through narrow avenues as trucks loaded with shouting men speed toward the city center. Some carry wooden clubs, others wave portraits of the Shah above their heads. Military vehicles rumble past startled shopkeepers as soldiers shout orders and force their way through intersections. Tehran is erupting. Inside government offices across the capital, telephones ring non-stop. Confusion spreads through ministries, military barracks, and newspaper offices. No one is certain who truly controls the country. At the center of the storm stands Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Only 2 years earlier, Mossadegh had become a national hero. In 1951, he nationalized Iran's oil industry, ending decades of British control through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. For many Iranians, it was a moment of pride, a declaration that their nation would finally control its own resources. But the decision had consequences. Britain responded with an economic blockade that crippled Iran's oil exports. Revenues collapsed. The political crisis deepened as international pressure mounted. In Washington and London, policymakers began to fear that instability in Iran could open the door to Soviet influence along the southern border of the Cold War. Inside quiet meeting rooms in both capitals, intelligence officials began planning a solution. The operation would later become known as Operation Ajax. Agents from the Central Intelligence Agency and Britain's MI6 worked behind the scenes to organize protests, influence politicians, and encourage segments of the Iranian military to turn against Mossadegh. For weeks, Tehran simmered with rumors and street demonstrations. Then, on that August day in 1953, the crisis exploded. Royalist officers moved against the government. Crowds clashed across the capital. Radio stations changed hands. By evening, Mossadegh's residence had been surrounded by military forces loyal to the monarchy. Within hours, the prime minister was arrested. The coup succeeded. From exile abroad, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi returned to Iran as the undisputed ruler of the country. For the young monarch, the experience left a permanent lesson. Power could disappear overnight, and the survival of his throne would depend on absolute control. Over the next 2 decades, the Shah would transform Iran, with an ambition that few leaders in the region had ever attempted. With vast oil revenues flowing into state coffers, he launched sweeping programs of modernization designed to turn Iran into a powerful industrial nation aligned closely with the West. Highways stretched across the country. New universities opened. Factories rose outside expanding cities. Tehran began to resemble a modern metropolis with gleaming office towers and luxury neighborhoods that symbolized the Shah's vision of progress. In 1963, the monarch announced a series of reforms known as the White Revolution. Land redistribution programs targeted large estates. Women received expanded voting rights. Literacy campaigns sent teachers into rural villages. The Shah promised that Iran would leap forward into the modern world. To many Western governments, especially the United States, Iran appeared to be a success story. Washington saw the Shah as a reliable ally in a region defined by Cold War rivalry and volatile politics. American military advisors trained Iranian officers. Advanced weapons flowed into the country. But inside Iran, the transformation produced deep tensions. Traditional landowners resented the redistribution programs. Clerics worried that rapid modernization threatened Islamic values. Merchants in the bazaars feared economic policies that favored state-controlled industrial expansion. Most dangerously for the monarchy, political dissent had little room to breathe. The Shah created one of the most feared intelligence agencies in the Middle East, SAVAK. With assistance from foreign advisors, the organization built an extensive network of surveillance that reached into universities, mosques, and government offices. Suspected opponents of the regime were arrested, interrogated, and sometimes disappeared. Criticism of the monarchy could bring devastating consequences. For many years, this system of control appeared effective. Opposition movements struggled to organize under constant surveillance. The Shah's government projected an image of stability that impressed foreign investors and diplomats. Yet beneath the surface, the anger continued to grow. Many Iranians saw the monarchy as increasingly disconnected from their daily lives. While oil wealth fueled grand development projects and royal celebrations, ordinary citizens faced rising costs of living and widening social inequality. The Shah's government often celebrated Iran's ancient imperial heritage, staging elaborate ceremonies that linked his rule to the Persian kings of antiquity. But in mosques and religious schools, another narrative was taking shape. Some clerics argued that the monarchy had abandoned Islamic principles and surrendered too much influence to Western powers. Among those critics was a relatively unknown religious teacher who would soon become the Shah's most dangerous opponent, Ruhollah Khomeini. In 1963, Khomeini publicly condemned the Shah's reforms during a fiery sermon delivered in the holy city of Qom. He accused the monarchy of undermining Islam and serving foreign interests. The speech electrified religious networks across the country. It also triggered the first direct confrontation between the cleric and the state. Security forces arrested Khomeini shortly after the sermon. News of the arrest spread rapidly, igniting protests in several cities. Demonstrators clashed with soldiers. Dozens were killed as the government moved quickly to restore order. Although the uprising was suppressed, the Shah had taken notice. Khomeini was no longer simply a local religious teacher. He was becoming a symbol. A year later, the government made its decision. Rather than execute him and risk turning him into a martyr, the Shah ordered Khomeini expelled from the country. In 1964, the cleric was placed on a plane and sent into exile. The monarchy believed the problem had been solved, but exile would prove far more dangerous than silence. Far from Iran's borders, Khomeini would begin shaping an ideological movement that slowly spread through the very networks the Shah struggled to control. Mosques, seminaries, markets, and eventually the streets themselves. The stage for revolution was slowly being set. October 1964. Qom, Iran. The narrow streets around the religious seminaries are tense with quiet anger. Students move in small groups between mosques, whispering about the speech delivered only days earlier by a defiant cleric whose words have already begun to circulate far beyond the holy city. Inside the Fayzia Seminary, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had spoken with unusual bluntness. He condemned a new law passed by the Iranian parliament that granted legal immunity to American military advisors stationed in Iran. To Khomeini, the measure symbolized something far deeper than diplomatic privilege. It was humiliation. Standing before an audience of seminarians and followers, he declared that Iran had become subordinate to foreign powers. He accused the Shah of surrendering the nation's sovereignty to the United States and warned that the country's Islamic identity was under threat. The speech was explosive. In Tehran, intelligence officials at SAVAK quickly recognized its significance. Criticism of government policy was one thing. Directly challenging the legitimacy of the monarchy and its relationship with Washington was another. Within days, the Shah made a decision. Before dawn on November the 4th, security forces surrounded Khomeini's residence in Qom. He was taken into custody and quietly transported to Tehran. Hours later, without public trial or formal announcement, the cleric was placed aboard a plane and flown out of Iran. The destination was Turkey. Exile was intended to remove him from the political landscape entirely. But revolutions rarely unfold according to the expectations of governments. After nearly a year in Turkey, Khomeini was relocated to Najaf, Iraq, one of the most important centers of Shiite religious scholarship. The quiet city would become the unlikely headquarters of a growing ideological movement. From Najaf, Khomeini began teaching religious students who traveled from across the Shiite world. Among them were young Iranians who carried his ideas back across the border. The cleric's message gradually evolved. At first, his criticism focused on the corruption and authoritarianism of the Shah's government. But over time, he began articulating a far more radical concept: the idea that Islamic jurists should govern the state. This theory, later known as Velayat-e-Faqih, argued that religious scholars possessed as the authority to guide society in the absence of the hidden imam, central to Shiite belief. For centuries, many clerics had avoided direct involvement in political power. Khomeini rejected that tradition. In a series of lectures delivered in Najaf during the early 1970s, he argued that Islam provided a complete framework for governance and that clerical leadership was necessary to prevent tyranny and moral decay. These lectures were recorded on cassette tapes. The technology would prove crucial. Students and visitors carried the recordings across borders, slipping them into luggage or hiding them among personal belongings. In Iran, the tapes were duplicated and quietly distributed through networks of mosques and bazaars. They were played in private homes, in religious gatherings, in back rooms of shops. For many listeners, the voice of Khomeini sounded calm but uncompromising. His speeches combined religious authority with sharp political criticism. He portrayed the Shah as both an oppressor and a servant of foreign interests. Each message reinforced the same theme: Islamic government was the solution. Meanwhile, inside Iran, the Shah continued pushing forward with his ambitious vision of modernization. The country experienced enormous economic growth, fueled by rising oil revenues, particularly after the global oil crisis of 1973. The sudden flood of wealth allowed the government to invest heavily in infrastructure, military expansion, and industrial development. Tehran transformed rapidly. Glass towers rose above crowded streets. Western companies opened offices. Foreign engineers and consultants filled new construction projects across the country. For a time, the Shah appeared confident that Iran was on the path to becoming one of the world's leading powers. But the pace of change created enormous strain. Rapid urbanization overwhelmed housing and transportation systems. Inflation began to rise. Rural migrants arriving in cities struggled to adapt to unfamiliar economic conditions. Many traditional institutions felt pushed aside by state-driven modernization. The monarchy also tightened its political control. In 1975, the Shah dissolved the remaining political parties and replaced them with a single organization known as the Rastaki's Party. Membership effectively became mandatory for citizens who wished to participate in public life. The message was clear: opposition would not be tolerated. Yet repression often produces unintended consequences. Discontent that cannot be expressed openly tends to gather in quieter spaces. Mosques became places where criticism could still be voiced indirectly through sermons and religious discussion. Clerics, sympathetic to Khomeini's message, slowly expanded their influence among students, merchants, and workers who felt alienated by the government's policies. Even within the educated middle class, frustration grew. Many professionals admired aspects of modernization but resented the lack of political freedom. Intellectuals criticized censorship and the expanding power of Savak. By the mid-1970s, the Shah faced a paradox. Iran appeared wealthy, stable, and powerful on the surface. Yet beneath that surface, resentment toward the monarchy was spreading through very different segments of society. Religious traditionalists, urban workers, students, merchants, secular intellectuals. Few of these groups shared the same political vision, but they increasingly shared the same opponent: the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, in Najaf, the aging cleric who had been expelled from Iran more than a decade earlier continued speaking into tape recorders. His voice traveled across borders and into the homes of people who had never met him. Each recording strengthened an invisible network of supporters. And as the 1970s moved toward their final years, events would soon begin to move far faster than anyone expected. January 7th, 1978. Tehran, Iran. In the early hours of the morning, stacks of newspapers arrive at kiosks across the capital. Vendors unfold the pages while commuters hurry past in the winter cold. At first, the article appears ordinary, buried among political commentary. But inside religious schools and mosques, readers suddenly stop. The government-controlled newspaper Etela'at has published a piece attacking Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The article describes him as a foreign agent. It accuses him of working with colonial powers. It mocks his religious authority and questions his loyalty to Iran. Within hours, the text spreads through the networks that had quietly supported the cleric for years. Copies are carried to seminaries in the holy city of Qom, where many of Iran's most influential religious scholars live and teach. By midday, anger is building. Students gather in the courtyards of seminaries reading the article aloud. Clerics condemn the government's insult. Word spreads through narrow streets lined with religious schools and markets. Protests begin forming almost spontaneously. Groups of students march through Qom shouting slogans against the Shah. Shopkeepers close their doors in solidarity. More demonstrators join the crowd as it moves toward government buildings. Security forces arrive quickly. At first, they attempt to disperse the demonstrators with warnings and arrests. But the crowd refuses to leave. Stones are thrown. Tension escalates. Then shots ring out. Several protesters fall to the ground. By evening, the streets of Qom are stained with blood. The government announces that order has been restored. Officials hope the incident will fade quickly, another brief disturbance suppressed by force. Instead, it becomes the opening act of a national uprising. In Shiite religious tradition, mourning ceremonies are held 40 days after a death. The victims killed in Qom are soon commemorated with memorial gatherings organized by clerics and local communities. 40 days later, in February 1978, those ceremonies ignite new demonstrations. This time, the protests erupt in the city of Tabriz. Crowds fill the streets chanting against the Shah. Banks associated with government programs are attacked. Police stations are surrounded. The authorities again respond with gunfire. More people die. Another 40 days pass. New memorials are held for those killed in Tabriz. This time, protests spread to other cities, including Yazd, Isfahan, and Shiraz. The cycle begins, repeating across the country. Death, mourning, protest, repression, another death, another mourning ceremony, another protest. Each 40-day cycle brings larger crowds. For the first time since the monarchy consolidated power decades earlier, demonstrations are no longer isolated incidents. They are becoming a national movement. Inside government headquarters in Tehran, the Shah watches these developments with growing concern. His advisors offer conflicting explanations. Some insist that the unrest is limited and can be controlled with stronger security measures. Others warn that the protests are spreading too quickly. The Shah has long believed that his reforms have placed Iran firmly on the path toward modernization and stability. Yet the crowds filling city streets seem to reject that vision entirely. At the same time, Ayatollah Khomeini remains in exile. But his influence is expanding. By now, his speeches are circulating widely inside Iran, through recorded tapes and written statements. Clerics, sympathetic to his views, read his messages during sermons. Students distribute recordings among friends and relatives. Each message reinforces the same narrative. The Shah is illegitimate. The monarchy must fall. Islamic government must replace it. Meanwhile, the protests are drawing participants from very different parts of Iranian society. Religious students march beside secular university activists. Bazaar merchants join demonstrations alongside factory workers. Even segments of the middle class begin quietly expressing support for reform or revolution. What makes the movement powerful is not ideological unity. It is shared anger. By the summer of 1978, demonstrations are taking place almost every week in different cities. Security forces attempt to control the situation with arrests and occasional shootings, but repression only fuels the next cycle of mourning. In August, a tragic event deepens the crisis even further. In the southern city of Abadan, a cinema packed with hundreds of people bursts into flames during a nighttime screening. The doors are reportedly locked from the outside as the fire spreads through the building. More than 400 people die. Rumors immediately spread across Iran. Many believe the fire was deliberately set by agents connected to the regime in an attempt to intimidate protesters. The government denies responsibility, but few trust the explanation. The tragedy intensifies public outrage. Protests become larger and more emotional. Funeral processions turn into political rallies. Demonstrators carry photographs of victims and chant openly against the Shah. Inside Tehran, the government begins to realize that the crisis has moved beyond isolated unrest. It is now a revolution in motion. The monarchy still possesses enormous resources, a powerful military, control of state institutions, support from key international allies. But revolutions are rarely decided only by force. They are also decided by legitimacy. And across Iran, the Shah's legitimacy is eroding rapidly. By the end of the summer of 1978, the streets of Tehran are preparing for the largest confrontation yet, a day that will become one of the most decisive turning points in the entire revolution. A day remembered as Black Friday, September 8, 1978. Tehran, Iran. Dawn breaks slowly over the capital. A pale orange glow spreads across the eastern sky as thousands of people begin gathering in Jaleh Square. Some arrive in small groups walking through quiet residential streets. Others come in buses and trucks from surrounding neighborhoods. They carry banners, photographs of religious leaders, handwritten signs demanding the end of the monarchy. Many of them have spent weeks marching in demonstrations across the city. The protests have grown steadily larger throughout the summer, fueled by funerals, religious commemorations, and mounting frustration with the government. But today feels different. The Shah's government has declared martial law in Tehran and several other cities only hours earlier. Military commanders have ordered strict curfews and banned public gatherings. Many people in the crowd have not yet heard the announcement. Others have heard it and come anyway. By mid-morning, the square is packed. Demonstrators chant religious slogans and call for the Shah to step down. Some climb onto rooftops overlooking the square to watch the gathering below. Then military vehicles begin arriving. Columns of soldiers take up positions around the perimeter. Armored vehicles block the main streets leading into the square. Loudspeakers order the crowd to disperse immediately, but the demonstrators remain. Some shout that the soldiers should join the people. Others raise their hands and shout religious phrases. Tension hangs over the square. Then the shooting begins. At first, the sound is sharp and scattered. Then it becomes continuous. Machine guns echo between buildings as soldiers fire into the crowd. Panic spreads instantly. People run in every direction, trying to escape through narrow streets already blocked by troops. Some fall where they stand. Others collapse while trying to climb walls or reach nearby alleys. Within minutes, the square is filled with smoke, screaming, and bodies lying across the pavement. When the gunfire finally stops, the exact number of dead is unclear. Government officials later claim fewer than 100 casualties. Opposition figures insist the toll is far higher. But the precise number matters less than the effect. The day will soon become known across Iran as Black Friday. News of the massacre spreads through Tehran by word of mouth before official announcements even appear. Families search hospitals for missing relatives. Mosques fill with mourners. Across the country, the reaction is immediate. For many Iranians, Black Friday destroys any remaining possibility of compromise between the monarchy and its opponents. The government has shown it is willing to use deadly force against its own people, and the revolutionaries have no intention of backing down. Inside the royal palace, Mohammad Reza Shah watches the crisis deepen. For years he has ruled with confidence, convinced that Iran's rapid modernization and military strength made the monarchy secure. Now that confidence is fading, the protests have not disappeared after the massacre. They have intensified. Each funeral for the victims of Black Friday becomes another demonstration. Clerics deliver sermons condemning the government. Students organize new marches. Workers begin discussing strikes that could shut down entire sectors of the economy. Meanwhile, the international community begins watching Iran with growing concern. Western governments worry about the stability of one of their most important allies in the Middle East. Iran's oil exports are critical to global markets, and its military is a key pillar of regional security strategy. In Washington, American officials debate how to respond. The United States has supported the Shah for decades. His government has purchased billions of dollars in American weapons and maintained close diplomatic ties. But the images emerging from Tehran are troubling. Crowds of protesters, Burned buildings, soldiers firing on civilians. Privately, some American policymakers begin questioning whether the Shah can still maintain control of the country. Inside Iran, the revolutionary movement is evolving quickly. By the autumn of 1978, strikes begin spreading across key industries. Workers in the oil sector walk off their jobs, cutting deeply into the government's most important source of revenue. Banks close. Factories halt production. Government offices struggle to function as employees join protests or simply refuse to work. The machinery of the state is slowing down. Meanwhile, Ayatollah Khomeini continues speaking from exile. But even his location is about to change. Under pressure from the Shah's government, Iraqi authorities decide that the cleric's presence in Najaf has become politically inconvenient. In October 1978, they ask him to leave the country. Khomeini chooses a destination that will surprise many observers: France. He settles in a quiet suburb outside Paris called Neauphle-le-Château. From there, with unprecedented access to international journalists and modern communication networks, his message spreads even faster. Television cameras capture his statements. Newspapers publish his interviews. Supporters in Iran continue distributing his speeches through cassette tapes and pamphlets. The revolution now has a visible leader, and the Shah's government is running out of time. October 1978. Neauphle-le-Château, France. The small village outside Paris looks quiet, almost ordinary. Narrow streets wind between stone houses and autumn trees shedding their leaves. Local residents walk past cafes and bakeries with little awareness that one of the most consequential political movements in modern history is being directed from a modest suburban home. Inside that house, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini sits surrounded by aides, clerics, and visiting supporters. Telephones ring constantly. Journalists from Europe, the United States, and the Middle East arrive daily, hoping to interview the man whose voice has become the rallying cry of a revolution unfolding thousands of kilometers away. The move to France has unexpectedly amplified Khomeini's influence. In Iraq, his communications had been limited and often monitored. In Paris, the global media is eager to hear from him. His statements travel instantly through television broadcasts and newspaper headlines. Each message follows the same theme. The Shah must leave. The Iranian people must decide their own future. Islamic government must replace the monarchy. Meanwhile, inside Iran, the protests that began earlier in the year have transformed into a nationwide uprising. The strikes are spreading. Factories stop operating. Government ministries struggle to maintain normal operations. Most critically, workers in the oil industry shut down production at major facilities across the country. Tankers wait idle at ports while pipelines fall silent. Oil revenues. The financial backbone of the Shah's government begin to collapse. The economic impact is immediate. State finances tighten. Industrial production slows. Every day that the strikes continue weakens the monarchy's ability to govern. In Tehran, the streets fill with demonstrations that grow larger with each passing week. Hundreds of thousands of people march through major avenues carrying portraits of Khomeini and chanting against the Shah. Religious slogans echo alongside political demands. Death to the Shah. Independence. Islamic government. Security forces still patrol the streets, but their response is becoming less predictable. Some units continue enforcing martial law orders. Others hesitate when confronted by massive crowds that include families, elderly citizens, and students. Inside the military itself, uncertainty is spreading. Many soldiers come from ordinary Iranian families who are watching the revolution unfold. Some officers remain loyal to the monarchy, but others privately question whether defending the Shah is still possible. The Shah himself appears increasingly isolated. For years he ruled with absolute authority, but now decisions are delayed and strategies shift from week to week. Advisors disagree on how to confront the growing unrest. Some argue that stronger military action could still restore order. Others warn that further bloodshed would only accelerate the collapse. In November 1978, the Shah attempts a dramatic gesture. Speaking on national television, he addresses the Iranian people directly. His voice is quieter than many expected. He acknowledges that mistakes have been made. He promises reforms. He declares that he has heard the voice of the revolution. For a brief moment, the speech creates uncertainty. Some citizens wonder whether compromise might still be possible. But the protests do not stop. Many demonstrators now believe that the monarchy has lost its legitimacy entirely. Any reform offered by the Shah seems too little and too late. Meanwhile, in Paris, Khomeini rejects the idea of negotiation. Through interviews and written statements, he insists that the Shah must leave Iran before any political solution can begin. The message spreads quickly. Inside mosques across Iran, clerics repeat the demand during sermons. Student activists distribute leaflets quoting Khomeini's words. Demonstrators chant the slogan during marches. The revolution has found a simple objective: remove the Shah. As December approaches, the scale of protests becomes unprecedented. On religious holidays such as Ashura, massive processions fill the streets of Tehran and other major cities. Millions of people participate in demonstrations that stretch across entire districts. For many observers, the sheer size of the crowds reveals a crucial truth. The monarchy is losing control. International governments begin quietly preparing for a future in which the Shah might no longer rule Iran. Diplomatic conversations shift from preserving the monarchy to managing the consequences of its collapse. Inside the royal palace, the Shah faces a decision that will determine the fate of his reign: stay and risk civil war, or leave the country and hope that order might somehow be restored. In January 1979, he makes his choice. January 16, 1979, Tehran, Iran. A cold wind moves across the tarmac at Mehrabad Airport as a convoy of black cars approaches the runway. Soldiers stand quietly beside the aircraft, waiting with engines already running. The scene is strangely calm for a moment that will mark the end of an era. Inside the final car sits Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. For nearly 38 years, he has ruled Iran as its monarch, presiding over one of the most ambitious modernization projects in the Middle East. Oil wealth transformed cities, expanded the military, and turned Tehran into a regional center of power. But now the Shah's empire is collapsing around him. As the car stops beside the waiting plane, the Shah steps out slowly. He wears a dark overcoat against the winter air. Beside him walks his wife, Empress Farah Pahlavi, whose expression reveals the gravity of the moment. A small group of military officers and government officials stand nearby. There are no cheering crowds. No grand ceremonies, only quiet farewells. The Shah shakes hands with several commanders who have served under him for years. Many of them struggle to maintain composure. Some salute, others simply bow their heads. Everyone present understands what this departure means. Officially, the Shah describes it as a temporary leave of absence, while a new civilian government attempts to stabilize the country. In reality, few expect him to return. For months, the revolution has steadily dismantled the authority of the monarchy. Strikes have crippled the economy. Protests have filled the streets of every major city. The military itself is increasingly uncertain about whether it will continue defending the throne. The Shah climbs the staircase into the aircraft. Moments later, the engines roar to life. As the plane lifts off the runway and disappears into the winter sky, news spreads quickly through Tehran. The Shah has left Iran. Across the capital, the reaction is immediate and explosive. Crowds pour into the streets, celebrating what they believe is the end of the monarchy. Demonstrators tear down statues of the Shah that once stood in public squares. Portraits of the royal family are ripped from government buildings and burned. For many Iranians, this moment represents the fall of a dynasty that had ruled the country for decades. Yet the future remains uncertain. Although the Shah has departed, the monarchy technically still exists. Before leaving, he appointed a new prime minister, Shapur Bakhtiar, a member of the opposition National Front, who agreed to lead a transitional government. Bakhtiar faces an impossible task. He promises sweeping reforms. Political prisoners will be released. Censorship will be reduced. Savak will be dismantled. Parliament will regain authority. But many revolutionaries refuse to accept his government. To them, Bakhtiar's administration is simply the final attempt of the monarchy to preserve itself under a different name. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of Paris, Ayatollah Khomeini watches events unfold with careful attention. Reporters gather once again outside his residence in Neaufle-le-Château. Cameras capture the moment when he learns that the Shah has left Iran. The cleric's reaction is measured. He declares that the departure of the Shah is only the first step. The monarchy itself must disappear. Soon afterward, he announces his intention to return to Iran. The statement electrifies his supporters across the country. Millions begin preparing for the arrival of the man they now see as the spiritual leader of the revolution. Inside Iran, Prime Minister Bakhtiar attempts to maintain control. He lifts martial law restrictions and releases many political prisoners in hopes of calming the streets. But the revolutionary movement is no longer interested in compromise. Demonstrators continue marching daily. Workers remain on strike. Clerics aligned with Khomeini organize committees that begin taking over local administration in some neighborhoods. Even within the military, loyalty is eroding. Young soldiers hear chants from crowds outside their barracks, calling them brothers rather than enemies. Some units quietly allow demonstrations to pass without interference. Others begin questioning orders. The state that once appeared powerful and unshakable is dissolving from within. By late January 1979, the final confrontation is approaching. Ayatollah Khomeini announces that he will soon board a plane and return to Tehran after 15 years of exile. The government initially attempts to block his arrival by closing the country's airports. But the decision sparks even larger demonstrations across the nation. Faced with overwhelming pressure, the authorities reopen the airports. Millions now wait for the same moment. The return of the man who helped ignite the revolution. The moment that will determine what kind of government will rise from the ruins of the monarchy. And the moment that will reshape the future of Iran. February 1st, 1979. Mehrabad Airport, Tehran. The runway disappears beneath a sea of people. From the control tower, officials stare in disbelief at the scale of the crowd stretching far beyond the airport fences. Highways leading into Tehran are clogged with vehicles that have not moved for hours. Entire neighborhoods seem to be walking toward the airport. Estimates suggest more than 3 million people have flooded the capital. They are waiting for one man. When the Air France aircraft finally appears in the winter sky, a roar spreads across the crowd like a wave moving through the city. Some people fall to their knees in prayer. Others climb onto rooftops, buses, and streetlights trying to see the plane as it descends. For 15 years, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini has lived outside Iran. Now he is coming home. Inside the aircraft cabin, the atmosphere is tense but quiet. Journalists sit beside clerics and political activists who have accompanied Khomeini on the journey from Paris. Cameras are prepared for what many already recognize as one of the defining political moments of the 20th century. Khomeini remains calm. He sits near the front of the plane dressed in his black robe and turban surrounded by close aides. His expression reveals little emotion despite the enormous crowd awaiting him. When the aircraft touches down at Mehrabad Airport, history changes direction. After stepping off the plane, Khomeini is greeted by revolutionary leaders who escort him through a narrow corridor of guards struggling to control the overwhelming crowd. The airport quickly becomes impossible to manage. Outside, the streets are packed so tightly that vehicles can barely move. The cleric's convoy crawls slowly through the capital as millions attempt to glimpse the man whose voice helped bring down the monarchy. The destination is Behesht-e Cemetery on the southern edge of Tehran. It is a symbolic choice. Thousands of victims of the revolution are buried there, including those killed during demonstrations and clashes with security forces over the past year. Standing before an enormous crowd among the graves, Khomeini delivers his first speech on Iranian soil in more than a decade. His words are direct and uncompromising. He declares that the monarchy has no legitimacy. He dismisses the government of Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar as illegal, and he announces that he will appoint his own revolutionary government to replace it. The message is unmistakable. The revolution is not finished. It is entering its final phase across Tehran and other major cities. Revolutionary committees begin expanding their influence. These groups, often organized through mosques, and local activists start taking control of neighborhoods, distributing supplies, and maintaining order where government institutions are weakening. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Bakhtiar attempts to preserve what remains of state authority. He still commands the official government. The military leadership has not yet fully defected, and some Western governments continue to recognize his administration as the legitimate authority in Iran. But Bakhtiar faces a rapidly deteriorating situation. Every day, larger demonstrations appear across the capital, demanding the immediate collapse of the remaining royal government. Within the military, discipline is fraying. Many conscripts come from families who support the revolution. Some soldiers openly refuse orders to fire on demonstrators. Others quietly abandon their posts. On February the 5th, only days after returning to Iran, Khomeini announces the formation of a provisional revolutionary government. He appoints Mehdi Bazargan, a respected engineer and moderate political figure, as its prime minister. The move creates two competing governments inside Iran. Bakhtiar's official administration still occupies government buildings. Bazargan's revolutionary government claims the support of the people and the authority of Khomeini. The situation becomes increasingly unstable. Protests continue to fill the streets. Strikes remain widespread. And inside the armed forces, the final question is approaching. Will the military defend the collapsing monarchy, or will it step aside and allow the revolution to succeed? Within days, that question will be answered. And the final chapter of the Iranian Revolution will unfold in the streets of Tehran, February 9th, 1979. Tehran, Iran. The first shots of the final battle echo through the night. At the Dosh and Tape Air Force Base on the eastern side of the capital, a confrontation erupts between military units that still support the government and groups of young Air Force technicians who have openly declared loyalty to Ayatollah Khomeini. For weeks, tension has been building inside Iran's armed forces. Many enlisted personnel sympathize with the revolutionary movement sweeping the country. Officers remain divided. Some insist that the military must restore order. Others believe the monarchy has already lost the support of the population. That night, the fragile balance finally breaks. Gunfire erupts inside the base as loyalist troops attempt to suppress the rebellious technicians. The sound carries into nearby neighborhoods where residents immediately recognize that something decisive is unfolding. Within minutes, crowds begin moving toward the base. Thousands of civilians pour into the streets. Some carry makeshift weapons, others arrive simply to stand beside the rebellious soldiers. Barricades appear quickly across major roads as demonstrators block the movement of government forces attempting to reach the area. In some neighborhoods, people raid police stations and military depots, seizing rifles and ammunition. By dawn, Tehran is in open revolt. Revolutionary groups clash with units of the Imperial Guard, still loyal to Prime Minister Bakhtiar's government. Tanks roll through city streets while armed civilians take positions behind burned vehicles and overturned buses. The fighting spreads rapidly. Radio stations broadcast urgent announcements. Revolutionary leaders call on soldiers to join the people. Mosques use loudspeakers to urge resistance against the remaining forces of the monarchy. Meanwhile, inside military headquarters, senior commanders face an impossible decision. If they order a full crackdown, the army may be forced into a bloody confrontation with millions of civilians. The risk of civil war is real. But if they refuse to act, the government will collapse. Throughout February 10th and into the following morning, the situation grows more chaotic. Military units defect. Police stations surrender. Revolutionary committees seize control of neighborhoods and distribute weapons to volunteers defending barricades. Inside Tehran, the authority of Bakhtiar's government is evaporating by the hour. Finally, on February 11th, 1979, the Supreme Military Council of Iran announces its decision. The armed forces will remain neutral in the conflict between the government and the revolutionary movement. The declaration is brief, but its meaning is unmistakable. The military will no longer defend the monarchy. Within hours, revolutionary crowds sweep through government buildings across the capital. Police headquarters fall into the hands of demonstrators. State television stations are seized by revolutionary forces who broadcast announcements declaring the victory of the revolution. Prime Minister Bakhtiar disappears from public view. His government effectively ceases to exist. Across Tehran, celebrations erupt as people flood the streets chanting religious slogans and waving flags. Statues of the Shah are pulled down from public squares. Portraits of Ayatollah Khomeini appear on buildings and storefronts. The monarchy that ruled Iran for centuries has collapsed in a matter of days. For millions of Iranians, the moment feels like the birth of a new political era. But revolutions rarely end when governments fall. They begin. The revolutionary coalition that helped overthrow the Shah includes religious leaders, secular nationalists, student groups, leftist organizations, and labor movements. Each of these factions has different ideas about what the future of Iran should look like. Some envision a democratic republic. Others expect a government guided by Islamic law. In the days following the revolution's victory, Ayatollah Khomeini emerges as the most powerful figure in the country. From his residence in Tehran, he begins shaping the structure of a new political system that will soon replace the monarchy, one that will combine religious authority with state power, a system that will become known as the Islamic Republic. April 1st, 1979. Tehran, Iran. In the early morning hours, Iranian radio stations broadcast a simple announcement across the country. The Islamic Republic has been approved. For weeks, following the collapse of the monarchy, Iran has existed in a strange political transition. Revolutionary committees control many neighborhoods. The provisional government, led by Mehdi Bazargan, attempts to maintain basic administrative order. Meanwhile, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini holds the ultimate authority as the spiritual leader of the revolution. But the shape of the new state has not yet been formally decided. In March 1979, the revolutionary leadership organizes a national referendum. The question placed before the Iranian people is direct. Should Iran become an Islamic republic? Polling stations appear in cities, towns, and villages across the country. Voters line up outside mosques, schools, and government offices to cast their ballots. Many arrive wrapped in winter coats against the fading cold of early spring. The ballot paper itself is simple. A green option marked yes, a red option marked number. For many participants, the vote is not only about political structure. It represents the symbolic end of the monarchy and the beginning of something entirely new. When the results are announced, the numbers appear overwhelming. The government declares that more than 98% of voters have chosen to establish an Islamic Republic. On April 1st, Ayatollah Khomeini formally proclaims the birth of the new state. Iran is no longer a monarchy. It is now a republic, guided by Islamic principles. The revolution that began with scattered protests and mourning ceremonies has produced a government unlike any other in the modern Middle East. In the months that follow, the structure of this new political system begins to take shape. A new constitution is drafted and approved later in 1979. At its center is the concept Khomeini had developed years earlier during his exile. Velayat-e-Faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. Under this system, ultimate authority does not rest solely with elected officials. Instead, a senior religious figure, known as the Supreme Leader, holds the power to guide the state and ensure that its policies remain aligned with Islamic law. Ayatollah Khomeini becomes the first supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. Below this position, a complex political structure emerges. An elected president, a parliament known as the Majlis, a judiciary system influenced by Islamic legal tradition, and powerful oversight institutions such as the Guardian Council that review laws and supervise elections. The transformation of Iran sends shockwaves across the international system. For decades, the country had been one of the United States' closest allies in the Middle East. The Shah's government had maintained strong ties with Western governments and served as a key pillar of regional security during the Cold War. Now that alignment is disappearing, the Islamic Republic presents itself as a revolutionary state opposing foreign domination and promoting political independence across the Muslim world. In Washington and European capitals, policymakers struggle to understand what this new government will mean for global politics. Meanwhile, inside Iran, the revolution continues reshaping society. Institutions associated with the monarchy are dismantled. Revolutionary courts prosecute former officials of the Shah's government. New political organizations compete for influence within the emerging system. Some factions that participated in the revolution soon find themselves marginalized as clerical leadership consolidates power. Yet for many Iranians, the revolution represents something deeper than political restructuring. It reflects decades of frustration with authoritarian rule, foreign influence, and social inequality. For supporters of this new government, the Islamic Republic offers a path toward national independence and cultural authenticity. For critics, it marks the beginning of a different form of authoritarian control. What cannot be disputed is the scale of the transformation. In less than 2 years, Iran has moved from a powerful monarchy backed by one of the world's most advanced militaries to a revolutionary Islamic state led by clerics. The shockwaves from that transformation will extend far beyond Iran's borders. Within months, the revolution will trigger a diplomatic crisis with the United States that will dominate international headlines. Within a year, Iran will face a devastating war with neighboring Iraq. And in the decades that follow, the Islamic Republic will remain one of the most influential and controversial political forces in the Middle East. But it all began with the events that unfolded between 1978 and 1979. Crowds filling the streets, a monarch boarding a plane into exile, and an aging cleric returning from 15 years abroad to lead a revolution that would permanently alter the political landscape of the region. The birth of the Islamic Republic did not simply change Iran. It reshaped the balance of power across the Middle East and redefined the relationship between religion and politics in the modern world. A revolution whose consequences are still unfolding today. End.